And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo. I made an eggs deck. What does that mean exactly? So eggs is I don't know if you could call it an archetype. It's certainly not a super popular one. It is certainly a strategy called the eggs deck because of a cycle of cards that came out in Odyssey. Of course, they were all called something egg, right? 1 mana artifacts that you would pay 2 mana and tap and sacrifice them and add 2 colors. So in this case of Darkwater Egg, we're adding a blue and a black to your mana pool and you're drawing a card. And what this effect does, and this is what I think of when I think of eggs effects, is this thing that I'm sacrificing but is essentially replacing itself, right? Like obviously this is filtering mana, but it's also drawing you a card. So I'm paying 2 mana to get 2 mana and also draw a card which replaces itself. So you're not really down anything. I guess you're down the original 1 mana you played, but essentially you're not really out a whole lot, right? And how the eggs deck would work is you would put all these eggs in here. Of course, there's a whole cycle of them. And then after sacrificing a whole bunch of them, you would second Sunrise, get them all back, and repeat the process, right? A lot of ways you can go from there. I believe, is Second Sunrise still banned in Modern? It was when I was playing Modern, and I believe that was the reason why. I believe Second Sunrise was banned in Modern because of the eggs deck. Obviously, there's a lot you can do with that, right? You are sacrificing artifacts, you're sacrificing permanents if that fits. You are having artifacts enter the battlefield, you're having artifacts leave the battlefield. There's a lot of things that you can do with that whole strategy. Another thing that is done in Modern with the Tron decks, again, when I played Modern, is with Chromatic Star and also with Chromatic Sphere, which essentially do the same thing. 1 mana artifacts, pay 1, tap, sacrifice, add 1 mana of any color, and draw a card. So it's a mini egg. It's doing the same thing, but just add 1 mana and draw a card. And effects like this, again, this is what I think of when I think of eggs. They're just a thing I play and it just replaces itself, right? And the Tron decks would use this it sort of filters through your deck. So it kind of works like a Ponder or Preordain in a little bit of a way. And also can mana fix, so they would use it to add green mana. Are they still doing that? I don't know, but that's what they used to do. And funny enough, the reason I came up with this idea and why I built this deck, which I will be talking about right away, is I had a patron through a deck doctor throw out a deck idea that they wanted me to look at where they were doing that. They were doing the Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star scenario to filter through their deck. It was a mono black artifact strategy. So the artifacts did work there, but they were using that to sort of filter through their deck to get the pieces they wanted. It does actually work pretty good. And I started thinking about it and I'm like, you know what, there is a lot, especially now, of artifacts that do that sort of effect where I can pay a little bit of mana, maybe sacrifice them. They'll give me card draw or mana or both. And then, maybe I could just keep the cycle going. And I'm wondering, can you build, and maybe people have already done this, can I build a eggs deck in Commander that will work really, really well? Wizard Rockets, for example, right? 1 mana artifact. This one came out in Lord of the Rings. Enters the battlefield tapped. Pay X and tap, sacrifice Wizard Rockets, add X mana of any combination of colors. So, of course, if you want, you can just pay 0 and just tap this to sacrifice it, because when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you get to draw a card. Brainstone, 1 mana artifact, pay 2 and tap, sacrifice it, draw 3 cards, put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So there's lots of different variations of these kinds of eggs type of rocks that are doing different things, right? Candy Trail came out in Wilds of Eldraine last year. 1 mana artifact, food clue. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 2. So some of these do have ETBs. And then you pay 2 and tap, sacrifice Candy Trail, you gain 3 life and draw a card. I really like Sleeper Dart a lot. I've used it in other decks before. Interestingly enough, from Ikoria, 2 mana artifact, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. So it's replacing itself, and you can tap it and sacrifice it. Target creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So very usable ability. But what are we doing with all these, right? So we have all these artifacts that are coming into play. We're sacrificing them. We're getting some effect. Maybe we're getting a card draw, like maybe they're replacing themselves. Regardless of the direction you go, and there's lots of directions you can go here. You are going to need like Scrap Trawler, for example, right? Scrap Trawler is again, this is the eggs strategy. When you Second Sunrise was banned, people replaced it with Scrap Trawler when that came out. Again, those decks were very common where people would do that. And obviously it works here as well. So Scrap Trawler is going to be an auto include because whenever Scrap Trawler or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard into the battlefield, return to your hand, target artifact card with lesser mana value. So if I sacrifice my Sleeper Dart to make sure some creature doesn't untap, now I can get my Brainstone back, right? And it just is added value. Again, it's that recycling sort of thing, right? Sir Ginger will work here. Sir Ginger the Meal Ender. And in fact, you could build and I don't know if anyone has, but you could build an eggs deck with Sir Ginger, fitting with the food theme there, right? Because whenever another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Sir Ginger and Scry 1. And the Scry 1 in particular can make sure that you very easily repeat the process, right? So if the card I'm going to draw is a land, I can scry that to the bottom so that I draw a Wizard's Rockets instead or something I can actually use, right? So you could very easily, again, maybe people have already done it, you could very easily build this theme with Sir Ginger. He obviously would go in the 99 of any deck you're building. He went in the 99 of the deck I was building. I really like red here, although I will say there are, and you could look at some of the Descent commanders that came out in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, right? That is like, what is the strategy we're doing here? Well, you're having lots of things leave the battlefield. That's certainly something you can build around. Any of those Descent commanders, this strategy will work there, right? This is very much a method 2 where I'm not building around any particular strategy. I'm just finding commanders that fit this strategy. I am having things going to the graveyard. I'm having lots of artifacts, obviously, going to the graveyard. I'm sacrificing stuff a lot. So any commander that wants you to be sacrificing, and there's probably a lot of commanders that will fit this theme because, of course, the majority of this theme is going to be a colorless theme. It's going to be mostly artifacts. You obviously could just build a Joyride deck. And again, I'm sure there are people out there that have already done that. There's probably people that have built a Joyride deck where I just cast all these artifacts and I'm drawing even more cards and I just kind of go off and then I storm off or I Aetherflux Reservoir and kill people. I'm sure people are already doing that. I'm trying to go in a little more interesting and a certainly casual way of doing it. Ferret Enterprising Salvager is another commander that will work here. A lot more underwhelming commander for sure. 2 in a red, Human Soldier 3/3. Whenever a non-token artifact you control is put in a graveyard for the battlefield, create a colorless artifact token named Scrap. So every single one of those artifacts that I'm sacrificing, I get a Scrap token that I can use for that second ability. Pay 1 and a red, sacrifice an artifact, choose 1, put a +1 counter on Ferret, it gains menace, go to creature or discard a card, then draw a card. And all of that, again, works in this strategy. And again, with the deck I made, Ferret is in the 99 because, of course, it works here. Red is a really important color here, I think. It works great with the sacrifice artifact theme. Scrap Mastery would be our Second Sunrise. And again, you could do the white version because, of course, Second Sunrise is not banned in Commander. Face Reward will do something similar, right? There are options in white where you can do that. So you could do a white version of the deck that does this. You could do a white-red version and get Scrap Mastery as well, because each player exiles all artifacts from their graveyard, then sacrifices all artifacts they control, then puts all cards exiled this way onto the battlefield. So it is a living death for artifacts. Slam dunk here because I can just sacrifice all those things and then get them all back, right? I like red here. The deck I made is red. Slag Fiend, 1 red mana construct, because I was trying to find ways to how can we take advantage of having all those artifacts in our graveyard. This is 1. Slag Fiend's power and toughness is equal to the number of artifact cards in all graveyards. And for 1 red mana, you're going to get a pretty big dude here. I think that's a pretty good fit in the deck. And Scrapyard Salvo is the other card that I could find that fit with the having artifacts in graveyards. 1 red, Scrapyard Salvo deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker for each artifact card in your graveyard. So this is 3 mana, do a whole bunch of damage to someone's face. So that will work here. I also really like black here because Disciple of the Vault is a card that will very easily work in this strategy. And again, how are we going to win the game? We have to win the game somehow. This is one of them. 1 black mana human cleric, 1/1. Whenever an artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. So it is a Blood Artist type of effect for artifacts. Obviously, that's going to work here. Vrock will also work here. 3 black bird demon 3/3 with flying. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, each opponent loses 3 life. So of course, in this deck, getting that revolt trigger is incredibly easy. Again, I will point out, I guess another commander that would work here is Lulu, because Lulu is a commander that wants that revolt trigger. You could build very easily build a Lulu deck with the egg strategy, doing all the second sunrise stuff. Add in black if you want, or red. So you could do a white-red version or a white-black version with Lulu if you want to, because also obviously getting revolt triggers is super easy here. Starving Revenant, one recently from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that works here. 2 black Spirit Horror 4/4. When Starving Revenant enters the battlefield, surveil 2 for each card you put on top of your library, draw a card, and you lose 3 life. Descend 8. So now we want stuff in our graveyard. Doesn't matter what, it's just got to be permanents. Whenever you draw a card, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So again, it's doing that Blood Artist thing. And this works particularly good here. Obviously, getting permanents in our graveyard is super easy. But also, again, these chromatic stars and all this are getting us lots of draw triggers as well. So that will be a great way to close out the game. Armix Filigree Thrasher is another black card that wants artifacts in our graveyard, obviously, and again, can be another option for a commander here. This is obviously a partner commander, and again, I would say either red or white are the other colors you want. I guess you could team up with a white Kiri, right? There you go. You can team up with a partner commander, have a Mardu version of this deck, have all the white stuff and all the red stuff and all the black stuff, and have a pretty darn good eggs deck there as well. That's not the direction I went, though. We haven't gotten to that part yet, but this is a black-red deck. Terror Tide is another great one that'll work here. 2 black sorcery. Fathomless Descent. All creatures get -X until end of turn, Rex the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. Really great board wipe that I think deserves more attention and, of course, works extra good here. And again, from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, they had that Descent ability, and that's what I went with here. Of course, I got to go with an underwhelming commander. Zoyowa Lava Tongue is the commander that I picked for this deck. Black and a red, Goblin Warlock 2/2 with Death Touch at the beginning of your end step. If you descended this turn, which means a permanent card went into your graveyard, each opponent may discard a card, sacrifice a permanent, or it deals 3 damage to anyone who didn't. So just a nice effect. That's it. Just my opponents have to discard, or sack a permanent, or it deals 3 damage to them. Right? So is there any cards in this deck where I specifically built around that? Not really. The only card that actually works with my commander, but obviously works with this theme as well, is Mayhem Devil. A slam dunk here, obviously, because if my opponents happen to sack something to my commander's ability, I get to throw a damage around. But of course, I'm sacrificing stuff like crazy. So every time I sack a Chromatic Star, Chromatic Sphere, Wizard Rockets, whatever, I'm getting a trigger off my Mayhem Devil. So obviously that's a slam dunk in this deck. I just picked Zoyowa as the commander because it's underwhelming. You know, when I first saw it, I was like, what are you going to do with this? Because, you know, descending is not super hard. You can discard. You can do a discard theme here very easily. It's impossible pretty much to know what your opponents are going to do. You could put a Geth's Grimoire in this deck. I think it might be worth it because it's likely that on every end step, you're going to have at least one opponent that's going to discard. Probably, you know, maybe not. I could put a Basilisk Collar on my Zoyowa because likely my opponents are going to be taking damage a lot, so I will gain life. There is a little bit you could do there. I didn't build around my actual commander a lot. It's just free value to what I'm doing already. I'm already doing that. Having stuff leave the battlefield is super easy for me. So I'm guaranteed going to get this trigger on every single one of my end steps, and it's just going to make my opponent's lives a lot harder. That's it. It is also going to help close out the game. I'm forcing my opponents to discard. I'm forcing them to sack permanents, and they're taking 3 damage. I imagine early in the game, they're going to take the 3 damage. Likely, almost always, everyone's going to be taking the 3 damage. I mean, this guy comes out quick, right? Right away, you're going to be doing 3 damage to each of your opponents because no one's going to want to discard and no one's going to want to sack permanents early in the game, right? So you're going to get your opponent's life total pretty low, I imagine. Ignite Memories is another way you can get your opponents low. This is kind of a win con in the deck. And again, the Storm mechanic does work here because you can cast 3, 4, 5, 6 spells in a turn fairly easy. So 4 and a red sorcery. Target player reveals a card at random from their hand. Ignite Memories deals damage to that player equal to the card's mana value. And of course has Storm. So get 5, 6, 7 copies of this. It could very easily kill one player for sure. There's a little bit of luck involved, obviously, but it's a pretty neat win con in the deck that I threw in here. This is a pretty neat deck. Zoyowa Lava Tongue is what I chose. Again, there are a lot of commanders that you could go with. I'm sure people are already doing it. This is the deck that I made. It is a great strategy for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is that you can very easily filter through your deck. Again, just like you would do with a ponder or preordain or something. I am cycling through with the artifacts that I'm sacrificing because they're giving me mana that I can use to cast the next one, and a card draw that I am drawing, and you draw into all the pieces you need very easily, right? That's why it works really well. Where you go from there is up to you, right? There's a lot of commanders that can fit with this strategy. Again, I like black, red, and white in this strategy. Those are the colors that you probably want to look at. Again, the white is going to give you second sunrise, faith's reward, and stuff like that. That works really good here. Red has a ton, like scrap mastery and a lot of other things that want artifacts to be going to your graveyard, and black actually works pretty good here as well. So you could do a white red version, a black red, black white, any of those combinations will work here. The deck that I made, the Zoyowa Lava Tongue deck, is in the description below if you are at all interested. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.